Okay, so Mishnah Zion, we're rereading. Ha'orez v'adochen v'haprogan v'hashumshumin. So rice, millet, poppy, and sesame. Shehishrishu l'fnei Rosh Hashanah, that took root before Rosh Hashanah. Misasrin l'sha'avar. So you take meiser based on the previous year. So meaning, let's say 6 months ago you planted them. This past August or July you planted them, and then Rosh Hashanah started and Shemitah started. So you have to take meiser for the 6th year, even though you're picking them during Shemitah. Umutar b'Shviis, you're allowed to treat them regular as Shviis. Bimla, but if they didn't take root before Rosh Hashanah, asur b'Shviis, you're prohibited from dealing with them regular and Shemitah because they're considered Shemitah produce. U'mitzarasin l'shana haba, and then the next year after Shemitah, then they'll be considered the regular produce of the first year. So the question is, why are these species, rice, millet, poppy, and sesame, different? Because if it's a fruit, it's taking root right before Rosh Hashanah isn't enough to make it the previous year's produce. And if it's a vegetable, it follows when you pick it. So why do these have a special status? So the Bartanura gives a very clear, good summary about everything. So the Bartanura says, even though for trees you follow when the fruit ripened, so if it ripened during Shemitah year, then all that fruit, even though it's picked after Shemitah's over, that's Shemitah's sanctity. And for vegetables, we follow when you pick it. And for produce and olives, it follows when a third of it's grown, when it was a third of the way matured or grown, because at that point it enters a stage called onas hamaisros. It's the time of meiser, meaning just like on Shabbos, if you cook something a little bit, you're not allowed to, but it's not considered full cooking until you cook it halfway, or according to some a third of the way the bandits used to eat, and that's the amount we say that it has to be that cooked before Shabbos in order to that it's considered cooked before Shabbos. Then you could leave it on the blach or whatever. So in regard to grain like wheats and barley and olives, it's considered it's developed enough that if you would pick it, you would have to give maestros, Truman Meiser off of it if it was a third of the way matured. So that's the time for grain and for olives. So how come these 4 species, rice and millet and sesame and poppy, are different? Because they're not picked like one, and they don't all ripen around the same time or get a third of their ripening the same time. So therefore, they have a special status, and these species also they follow they follow when they took root. So since you planted at one time, and even though they ripen at different times, so they have a special status. So if they took root, before Shemitah, then it was considered that it's from the 6th year. If it didn't take root until Shemitah, then it's considered Shemitah produce. So these things are a special status. Mishnah Ches. Rabbi Shimon Shizuri Omer. Rabbi Shimon Shizuri says, Pul HaMitzri. So Pul HaMitzri, according to some, it looks like it's called the Turkish bean, even though Mitzri technically is Egyptian, but I guess at the time of this, it wasn't known as Egyptian bean anymore. Professor Felix says it's the cowpea. I'm not sure what a cowpea is, and I don't remember how the regular translations translate it. Egyptian, okay. Kayotze behem. So that has the same status as rice and millet, like we just said. Rabbi Shimon Omer afunin hagamlun kayotze behem. Rabbi Shimon says that Afunim hagamunim, which seems to be chickpeas. So that's important for Israel if it really is chickpeas, because that's what hummus is made of, also is special. It doesn't grow like the regular vegetables. It grows more like the rice and the millet stuff. Rabbi Lazar Omer, Afunim hagamunim mishatimelu lifnei Rosh Hashanah. So the Afunim hagamunim, these chickpeas, it has to be that they made some type of pods or some type of crowning flower was growing out of the top before Rosh Hashanah, because that shows that it takes root. So it's not just enough to think that it took root, but it has to also grow to a certain development to this when it, according to some, it makes pods. This word mishatirmalu. So, I mean, the Bartanura says mishatirmalu means it became hard on the outside, meaning it's not just taking root, it has to reach a certain level of development, according to Rabbi Elazar, for it to be considered. He agrees that if it had this amount of development before Shemitah, it's considered 60-year produce. That's what he says. Test habitzalim hasarisin, sterile onions, meaning that you're not able, they grow without having seeds to plant more onions from them. Upul hamitzri, shamana mehemayim shoshim lefnei Rosh Hashanah. And this Egyptian bean or cowpea, which you stop watering it 30 days before Rosh Hashanah, misasin l'sha'avar, you take meiser like the previous year, umutar b'shviis, and you're allowed to pick them regular on Shemitah. They don't have the sanctity of Shemitah. So the reason seems to be because it seems that part of it has to do with the fact that you're not going to be, because in those days, when you had a crop, some of the crop you ate and some of the crop you saved as seeds for the next year. Like we saw Yosef in Mitzrayim, they were saving part of the crop as seeds for next year. So these things, you're not going to be using them. It's going to be impossible to have, I guess, to use any of them as seeds. So if you stopped watering them before 30 days before Rosh Hashanah, they are not considered vegetables anymore. Or it's a different halacha. So some vegetables are vegetables that you need to water, and some are just need the water of the rain. So the fact that you stop watering it shows that it's not like a regular vegetable that you keep watering it until you pick it, and then it has the kedusha based on when you pick it. The imlav, but if you didn't stop watering it, asur b'shvius, you're not allowed to use it on Shemitah. U'misarsin l'shana haba, and you have to, and then the year after Shemitah, then it's would be its first year. Now, the Bartanura points out that in the previous Mishnah, we said that this cowpea or Egyptian bean had the stat, as long as it took root before Rosh Hashanah of Shviis, of Shemitah, it's considered 60-year produce. So he says that in those cases, and I don't fully understand this, that in that case you planted it in order to develop more seeds, and in this case you were planting it for as a food. I don't fully understand why that's different. But that's the halacha for that particular species. Bishal Baal, if it's from an irrigated field. So the Bartanur says it's down in the valley, so you don't have to water it because streams from higher up water it. Shamana mehemaim shtei onos. So if you had blocked up the streams that used to water the field for 2 time periods, which means, however, they used to have some type of, I guess, watering periods, and this would be much more than 30 days. So if it's an irrigated field, the fact that you stop watering it doesn't show that you're meaning what we just learned. If you stop watering it, so then it's not a Shemitah thing. So here you'd have to stop up the streams that would water it even earlier than 30 days before Rosh Hashanah to show that you don't want it. And only in that case would it be considered 60-year produce, even though it right now is the middle of Shemitah year and these things have grown and are ready to be picked. But if you didn't stop up the water there for whatever these 2 time periods were, it's considered Shemitah produce, and you're not allowed to pick it regularly. It has to be hefker. We'll talk about all those things, the requirements of Shemitah produce later on. Divrei Rabbi Meir, and the Chachamim, that Rabbi Meir says only 2 times that it had to be blocked. The water had to be blocked for 2 periods, but the Chachamim say 3 time periods. So they're much stricter. You have to have shown that you weren't going to treat it like a regular vegetable for a very long time. Yud, hadlum shakiman lazera. So some type of gourds or squash that you weren't going to eat it, you're only using it for seeds. If they got hard, because they had dried out somewhat and they became hard before Rosh Hashanah of Shemitah, and they're no longer fit for human consumption, you are allowed to keep them during the Shemitah year. So there's a halacha that I think we mentioned it in one of our introduction, that the Shemitah produce, you're only allowed to use it for eating as long as it's in the field, because there's a pasuk with mentions the animals. So when it's there for the animals to eat, you could eat it too. So that means you're not allowed to save seeds from those fruit to plant the next year either, because that would be keeping part of the Shemitah produce past when you're allowed to keep it. So if it got hard before Rosh Hashanah and it's no longer edible, it's not considered food. So therefore, those seeds you'd be allowed to keep for the following year after Shemitah to plant those seeds. The imlav, and if it doesn't get hard like this, that it's unfit for human consumption, also common b'shvius. You're not allowed to keep them on Shemitah because it is considered Shemitah produce. So again, a lot of these things, it's a little bit difficult for us to understand because we're not up to we're not as familiar with all these different species and all the ways that they would harvest them or keep them, or when they were using them for seeds versus using them for food. For at least for me, these things are not so easy to understand practically. What about? Yeah. Oh yeah. So that was the Mishnah. Some of the Mishnahs in the first chapter. Certain trees, if it's a Natiya, you're allowed to water it all the way up to Shemitah, because otherwise it's going to die before Shemitah. So yeah, so we learned last week the Mishnah laws. Hopefully we'll be able to get to some of the, when we finish the Mishnah and we learn the laws, we'll learn some practical things about planting trees. So yeah, and so we saw an opinion. So yeah, one of the opinions in the Mishnah was as for the first 4 years when it's Orla, and when it's Orla, you're allowed to keep watering it, because if you don't water it all, it's going to die. So we'll learn the details, God willing, soon. But yes, there is we did see some special dispensations for newly planted young trees, so that they don't die over Shemitah. But again, also some of the possible heterim is, according to some opinions, whether watering is considered actually planting. Like in regard to Hilchos Shabbos, we consider it like that, or at least a tolda. For Shemitah, we might not. So it may not be as bad to water something in some situations as it is to plant something. Do you understand the difference? So in regard to Shabbos, we consider watering like planting, but it's a tolda, it's not an av malacha. But in regard to Shemitah, so it would also, it would be usher, but not as serious. So, well, we'll see the halachas. What we said last week was watering it up until Rosh Hashanah, or you had to stop until stop watering it until Shavuos time, so that it wouldn't die. That was Mishnah. That was Mishnah Vav Zayin and Ches in the previous parak. You couldn't do the work for that on Shemitah, but you could do it all the way until Rosh Hashanah, because since to stop watering before Rosh Hashanah was only rabbinic, we said that the Chachamim never prohibited it on the new trees because they didn't want you to lose the young trees that you had planted. That answer your question? Not so much, but okay. The Imam also comes to Shviis. So some type of fruits. I mean, tomorrow literally means dates, but sometimes it means like berries that were growing on these things. So meaning these gourds that had hardened, but now they're also forming some type of vegetation. Asuras b'Shviis. Those are prohibited on to use on Shemitahs. Umar Bitzin, ba'afar lavan divi Rabbi Shimon. Okay, so this is a different halacha. So marbitzin means you can't. So it seems to me like the way that we sometimes would, sweep a floor to keep it clean, they would spritz water on the ground. So that was a way of watering. So this was the fields that did not have trees. So remember we saw last week, if it didn't have trees, it was called white, I guess because the sun scorched it all during the summer. So there was nothing green in them. So it's called a white field. So you're allowed to water these fields Erev Shviis in order that it will have vegetables on Shemitah. And the Bartanura says that this opinion is saying you could even water them on Shemitah. So let's say next July, August, so that when Shemitah is over, after Rosh Hashanah is over, you can pick those fruits after Shemitah is over. Divi Rabbi Shimon. That's the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Lazar ben Yaakov Osir. Rabbi Lazar ben Yaakov prohibits this. Memarsin ba'orez b'Shviis. So again, here's something. It seems you're allowed to stir the rice paddy. But again, I haven't seen a rice paddy, and I didn't go to YouTube to look at one either. But you're allowed to stir the I think it's the rice paddy on the Shemitah. You're Rabbi Shimon Omer aval ein mechaschen, but you're not allowed to cut. So the Tiferes Yisrael says that when you're cutting this, and it's implicit in the Bartanura that just like you prune trees to help it grow better, so this act of cutting of this rice was to help it grow better. So by doing that, that's improving the growing process. So that is prohibited. Any questions? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Anything with a reliable hechsher, you don't have to worry about. Okay, so anything that's a mahadran hechsher is certainly not a problem to use. Now, I don't remember the way they sell it. They might, because you can't weigh and count the way you normally do. So however they do it, that's how you have to buy it. And some will say it's otzer based in, some will say heter mechira. So I think the main difference is, so you have to know this, where you buy your stuff, you have to know which one they're doing. Because if it's oats or based in, you're not allowed to throw it out. You have to let the scraps rot. You have to have a special container where you keep the scraps. So if it's oats or based in, so oats or based in is that the based in keeps it for everyone. So they pick it, but then they bring it to the based in. So it's not, so oats or based in produce, if I'm not mistaken, is has a kedusha, has sanctity. So therefore, and there's a drush on a pasuk, laochal below lahafsid, to eat and not for loss. So you can't waste it. So you have to put it in a special container until it rots or whatever. And then I think they throw it out. I don't remember exactly what you do. And if it's heter mechira, I think we hold that it doesn't have kedusha shvius. But yeah, the best thing is to talk to people there, because when I was there, I really didn't buy any fruits or vegetables. I was at Karen Biavna, so I wasn't near anything either to buy. And at the yeshiva, the stuff that we had kedusha shvius, so we had to put the scraps into a different container, not the garbage can, at the end of the meal. Okay, so I've never been in any of those stores. So I certainly not during Shemitah, but I've never been in those stores at all. So I don't know. So just talk to people who know how it works. You're welcome. I don't know, but if you use anything with the reliable hechsher, Rabbanu Mahadran, or any badats, everything you don't have to worry about it. It'll also say on the label, oh, look, 7 years ago, whatever, when I bought, or 6 years, whatever, around the last Shemitah, on one of the Israeli pickles, or one of those type of thing, or olives, whatever, it said on the top, like where the code and the dates are, it said Yibol Shishis, which meant it was from the crop of the 6th year. So you didn't have to worry about it being Shemitah at all. So the grapes, for the reliable hachsherim, they certainly don't, it'll say on the back in Hebrew, L'lo chashash shvius. But again, any reliable hachsher is you could rely on the hachsher. But when you're buying vegetables from a store or in the shuk, you have to look at each individual vendor's certificate and see what the details are, because it could change from week to week. Per Gimel, chapter 3. So in those days, so they didn't go to Blaine's Farm and Fleet or whatever to buy fertilizer, but the fertilizer that their domesticated animals naturally produce, they would bring that to their field and have a place in the field, which was the place to leave the fertilizer. So when can you take out your fertilizer to the fields, to your storage areas in the field, which it wasn't like it was a barn or anything, but it was a designated part in the field where you kept the fertilizer. So this next phrase doesn't make so much sense. Misha yifsaku ovdei avoda, when the people who do work stop. So the Bartanura says when the people who see, the problem is we're not sure what the right words are. Mishisku ovdei avoda, the people who do work, or ovdei avera. Doesn't mean the people who are doing averas and working their fields during Shemitah. What's this talking about? So according to the Bartanura, if the people who are working their fields in violation of the laws of Shemitah are still working, you're not allowed to put your stuff there, because it looks like you are trying to fertilize your field during Shemitah. But the Bartanura does say that some texts have our word that ovdei avoda, the time that people are doing work, but he says it means the same thing. If people who are violating Shemitah are working the fields, you're not allowed to take it out, because it looks like you're also working the fields. But once they're done working the fields, people know that it's not for stuff it's in the crop, you're in the field, so you're allowed to bring that to the fields. Yeah, Mike. So Shemitah means, so you're not allowed to plant stuff in your field on Shemitah. Certain things that were planted beforehand, you're allowed to harvest on Shemitah, but we'll see that some of the things you can't harvest the regular way. Like you could harvest a day's worth of food maybe, but you can't harvest commercially on a commercial type basis. So the thing is that there were people, because no, we last week we spoke about you could work on your trees up to a certain time before Shemitah, but then you have to stop and not work on them during Shemitah. But there've always been times, because people say, if I don't work, I'm going to lose my field, I'm going to be starving, and they worked in a violation. So this mission is talking about people who worked their field even though it was an avera. So let's say I have trees that are already growing. So a tree I don't have to plant because I planted my orchard 20 years ago. But if I prune the trees on Shemitah, I'm making the trees grow better. That's what the act of pruning does. So I'm not allowed to prune them on Shemitah. But we were saying that some of the other things, let's say the thing we said at the beginning today was rice and millet and poppy. If you plant those before Rosh Hashanah of Shemitah starts, and they took root beforehand, then they're considered 6th-year produce, and you're allowed to pick them during Shemitah without any restrictions. But let's say you had cucumbers, so you planted them. Why can't you do what? Oh, so Shemitah starts on Rosh Hashanah. So right now we're in the middle of the year. That last Rosh Hashanah started Shemitah. So the fruit that was on the trees, that fruit had all developed before Rosh Hashanah, even though if it wasn't necessarily the harvest time yet. So that fruit you were allowed to harvest regularly because it wasn't considered Shemitah produce. Now that the spring is coming, the trees are going to be blossoming now and start to having fruit. So that fruit and that wheat and stuff that is growing now, that's going to have sanctity of Shemitah, even though it doesn't get picked, and people might be using it up until a year from now. So even though Shemitah ends at Rosh Hashanah, but some of the fruit that's on the trees, that's their prime season for the Shemitah, because they don't grow between September and September. So this halacha is, again, doing other things to help your field grow better. So if you bring out your fertilizer to your field, people think you're working. So at the time that either people are working their fields illegally, or if people against halacha would be working their fields, you're not allowed to bring your fertilizer out. If it's later than that, then people know that you're not fertilizing your field. You just have to move it out there. Diva Rabbi Meir. These are the words of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Huda Omer Misha Yivash Hamasa. When any of the moisture that was in the field is no longer there. Rabbi Yossi Omer Misha Yikshor. Rabbi Yossi says that it seems that the fertilizer has to be drying out and forming knots, because the word Yikshor is like the word kesher, which means knots. So whereas Rabbi Yehuda seemed to be that it was a certain level of the field, because once the field is dry, you don't fertilize it anymore. Rabbi Yossi's opinion seems to be that it has to do with the fertilizer itself drying out. But these two times are very, very close to each other. Bays, ad kama mizavlin. How much fertilizer are you allowed to bring to the field? Ad shalosh ashpasos lebeisa shel eser mashpelos shel lesach lesach. Okay, so this is it's a little bit of math here. So you can make 3 depots. I'm just calling it the word depot. I don't know how it's translating it, but an ashpa, to us, an ashpa is a garbage, but an ashpa is some type of collection place. So that's why I called it a depot. Whatever is you could have up to 3 collection places for the 2,500 square amma field, and each of those 3 depots can have 10 mashpelos, which are brick-sized, I don't know, things, shalesach lesach, and each lesach is a certain amount. So you're allowed to have 3 of these collection places. Each of those 3 collection places can have 10 of these mashpelos. And each of those mashpelos have, I think it's 50 lesach or something. So each of these mashpelos has 1 lesach. Mosivin ala mashpelos, you can add the number of ashpelos, ve'in mosivin ala hashpatos, but you can't have more than 3 depots. Rabbi Shimon Omer ap ala hashpatos, you could even have more than 3. Because when you're making big piles of fertilizer, we see that you're not fertilizing your field. But if you make a smaller one, people would think that you're fertilizing the field. But when you're putting a big collection, you're clearly not fertilizing. I mean, you're eventually going to fertilize it, but you're not fertilizing right now. You can make your field 3 of these depots for every 2,500 square amos, which that seems to be what we just said. Yasamikan machziv, but if you have more than this, you're going to have to start. Machziv seems to be like chiseling things out. So this means you have to put them close to each other, like in a circular thing. You're not allowed to line them up, but you have to kind of make them in these round piles. I don't think is the right word, but collections. The Chachamim say you're not allowed to do this with the fertilizer until you either have to like dig under your 3 tfachim off the top of your field, or put some type of elevated 3 tfachim off the field, because then we see people know that you're not fertilizing your field with this fertilizer that you're bringing. So you have to make it 3 tfachim deep or 3 tfachim higher. So either you put something to lift it up as a platform, or now the digging itself, it has to be something that doesn't look like you're working the field. Osa adam zivlo otzer. You're allowed to make the fertilizer into an otzer is like a big storehouse. So meaning these three depots that you make that have 30 of these blocks, you're allowed to make it into one giant thing and add it and add to it. So this opinion is saying you can add to the number of ashpasos, which in the end of the last Mishnah seemed to be a machlokas between the Tanakhama and Rabbi Shimon. The Tanakhama said you're not allowed to add on to them. Rabbi Shimon said you are. Now this Mishnah seems to be saying that you are allowed to add to these ashpasos. Rabbi Meir oser achiamek shlosha, but Rabbi Meir, who is not mentioned, the opinion wasn't mentioned by name in the previous Mishnah, prohibits this unless you make it 3 tvachim deep under the ground, under the top of the ground, or shlosha, until you lift it up. If you have just a little bit, you're not adding another block to your thing. You're allowed to add that to your collection. Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah oser achiamek shlosha achigvia shlosha achitin ala sala. Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah says you're not allowed to do that until you either again make a platform, and so it's the fertilizer is 3 tvachim above the ground, or you make it underneath the ground level, or you put it on a rock. If you have big rocks, a sela like a boulder, you're clearly not fertilizing your field by putting it on a boulder. Dalet hamadayer esadehu. So let's say you have a flock of goats or sheep or whatever. So if you bring them to the field, they're gonna do the fertilizing. So in order that it won't look like you're having them fertilize the field by being out there, osa sahar levesa sayim. You have to make, now sahar, it's interesting. Sahar is almost like in some cases that means a jail, but basically you surround it for the amount of a beis hasayim. So it's a little bit more than 70 a little bit more than 70 amos times 70 amos square. I mean, so 70 times 70, whatever that is, square amos. I think it's like 243. Is that right? No, it's almost 5,000 square amos. So what do you do? Oker shalosh ruchos umaniach esem tzais. You uproot 3 of the sides and you leave the middle. So nimtza medayer base arbas sign. So where's a picture? So basically, so so you're surrounding a certain area in the middle of the field, but then you have to take away 3 of the walls, 3 of those fences. Oker shalosh ruchos, you uproot 3 of those of 3 of the directions. And you could leave the middle. Oh, so I'm sorry for not for. So when that enclosure is full, the Bartanura says, then you take out 3 of the take off 3 of the fences, and then you continue the fence in one direction. So you keep doing blocks at a time. So think of a tic-tac-toe board. You start in the middle of the tic-tac-toe board, and then after they've been there for a certain period of time, I don't know how long it is, then you move to one of the adjacent squares. Nimtza medayer base arba saying, so you end up getting 4 of these squares that have fertilizer. So Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Omer Beis Shmona sign, it ends up being 8. Haisa Kosadeo Bas Arba sign, but if your entire field was only 4, Beisad Mishayir Mimena Mikzas Mipena Maris Ayin. You're even though according to the Tanakama, if you have a bigger area, you're able to get that much area fertilized. If that's the entire size of your field, you have to leave some of your field where the animals can't get to, so they can't fertilize it. So it shows you're not fertilizing your whole field. But then you can move some of it from the enclosed area and took it to the other fields the way that regular people move it. So if you see this picture here, so according to the Tanakama, you had the tic-tac-toe blocks were 2 besa each, and you ended up getting this black one filled with fertilizer, and then you move to one of the adjacent ones, and that gets fertilized, and that's it. According to Shimon Gamliel, it seems that you can move in to 4 adjacent to get 4 total squares, because he says you're going to have 8 besa. So one way of doing it is if you keep going to adjacent squares, you go, let's say you start in the middle of the tic-tac-toe board, you go up and then you go left and then you go down. So you have those 4 out of the 9 squares ended up getting fertilizer. Whereas it seems that according to some, learn that you're making like the plus sign shape. of that fertilizer. Instead of going from the middle to adjacent squares, making kind of like adjacent, you start from the middle, you went left, you came back to the middle, you went up, came down to the middle, to the right, back down to the middle, and then down. So according to those opinions, so you actually had 8 additional base because you had 1, 2, 3, 4 in addition to the original one. That's one interpretation of Shimon Gamliel, whereas according to the other one, you'd hit 3 additional ones, you had a total of 4. So 4 out of the 9 squares versus 5 out of the 9 squares. But they both have to do with adjacent, but they're defining how you move adjacently different. Hey, lo yiftach adam machsev, batchilu l'toch sadeo achiubo sholosh murbios. So let's say you had a very, very rocky field. So you said, okay, I can make Jerusalem stone out of here, Jerusalem brick, you know? So you are going to make a quarry out of your very rocky field. But what's the benefit or the what's going to happen if you get all the rocks out of your field? What are you going to have left? You're going to have dirt. Then once you have dirt, you can plant it. So by making the quarry and getting rid of all these rocks, you are preparing to be able to plant in it because it's going to be dirt afterwards. So you're not allowed to start doing that on Shemitah, because people think that you're trying to get rid of the rocks in order to plant that as a field. Until there are 3 morbios. So you had to do a certain level of quarrying before Shemitah started, that people could see that you have 3 rows of stones. Each one of those is 3 amos long, so between 4.5 and 6 feet long, and the same amount wide, and they have to be 3 amos high. So basically, you're having 3 piles, amma by that it's like, if you're thinking of in terms of blocks or giant dice of stones, you're going to have 9 of these dice, like 3 piles of 3 each. But we'll see, not everyone understands it exactly that way, but that's basically what we're talking about. Shiur and Esrim v'Shiva Avanim. And it means that there's going to be 27 stones, because if your one is 3 by 3, it seems that each one of them is going to be 27 blocks high. I mean, each pile is full of 27, because if it's 3 times 3 and it's 3 high, you have 9 on the bottom, and then 9 on top of those, and then 9 on top of those. And you have 3 piles like that. So if you did that much before Shemitah, it's clear that you are quarrying your land. And even though the byproduct is going to be that you're preparing the land, but we know that you did this much before Shemitah, then you'll be able to continue doing that even during Shemitah. If you had a fence that was made out of stone, and you had at least 10 stones, and each of those stones needed 2 people to move. You're allowed to move them on Shemitah, even if they're a little bit smaller. And we're not worried that people think that you're clearing out this fence in order to have more place to plant. Shiur Geder Asar Tvachim. The amount of this fence is 10 Tvachim. So I don't know exactly if it means 10 Tvachim across. It can't be that the whole fence only took up 10 Tvachim of area of your field. But when you're taking away stones that are that big, the First Yisrael says, people know that you're using them to use in construction of another house or something. So even though the byproduct might be that the field, you have a little bit more place to plant your field, they understand that the main use of moving those stones is for construction. Pachos mikan, but it seems if the stones were smaller than this, and the fence had to be at least 10 tefachim high. That's what the 10 tefachim. The fence had to be at least 10 tefachim high. But if it was less than that, or it was less than 10 stones, or the stones were not heavy enough that you needed, or at least 10 of the stones to be carried by two people, you're allowed to quarry it, but you have to leave at least one tefach, 3 or 4 inches of the stones on top of the earth. So you can't go all the way down to the ground, as they say. But because then it shows that you're not preparing the land for planting. That's if it's your own field. But if it's someone else's field, then you could take it even down to the ground. And this is if you didn't start before Shemitah. But if you already started this project before Shemitah, you could keep on taking. And even in your own field, because we know that you're this is a different project, and it's not that you're doing this work on Shemitah. And if it's in someone else's field, what do you have to gain by getting his field in a plantable condition? So according to this Tana, it's not a problem for you to take from someone else's field. So if a plow had knocked them up, had brought them up, or these stones are starting to come up from underground. If they're so big that you need, if there's at least 2 of them, and they're so big that you need 2 people to carry them, then you're allowed to move them on Shemitah. If you're removing stones from your field, so this is not quite quarry, but there are obviously lots of stones, you can take the upper ones, but you have to leave the bottommost layer, which is directly on the ground of your field. I don't have. I forgot to bring my own translation notes with me today. Yeah, pile of pebbles or heap of stones. So they're small ones. You can take all the upper ones, but leave the ones that are touching the ground. But if underneath them was rock, solid rock, or straw, you can take them also, because you're not able to plant in the straw or in the solid rock. Ches. So I think this is the last. There's a couple more. Nice. So it seems they were like near waterfalls or something. So you're not allowed to build some steps to go, because obviously it's steep. So you're not allowed to build steps with, and they would bring stones if you ever gone hiking in some of these places in Israel. So at times you have to go way up or way down, and there's things they kind of look like steps, but they're made of individual big rocks, and they're not flat, and they're not necessarily all the same size. So you're not allowed to do that the year before Shemitah, after the rainy season ends, because it looks like you're fixing him to Shemitah. You're not going to have any really use of these steps until Shemitah year. You don't need them during the summer to get up, because it's not slippery and muddy. And there may not even be a waterfall there during the summer, because it might need the snows and the rains from the winter to have it. You could build it on Shemitah year itself, after the rains have stopped, because you're improving it for the year after Shemitah. And you're not allowed to if you're trying to, it looks like, to stop up part of a flowing thing, you can't do it in a way that looks permanent. So it looks like almost like the step is actually not for people to go on, but it's a step to direct the water towards your field. So it looks like you're building it so that next year on Shemitah, the water is going to follow these steps and water your field. So when we said that you're allowed to do it, you're not allowed to do it like with what we would call, cement or whatever to make it real good. Also chayetz. You could only make it stack stones without filling in all the gaps in between. When I say cement or mortar, you would fill in the cracks and stuff like that in between the different pieces of stone. You're not allowed to do that. Any stone that you're able to stick out your hand and take it, you're able to take it. So that's not considered if it's that small, it's something that you're allowed to work on. It doesn't look like you're improving things for Shemitah. Avnei kasef baos mikol makom. So avnei kasef literally means shoulder stones. So if it's a shoulder so the way I guess that they carried big stuff in those days would they put it on their shoulder. Now I don't know if it means they put it on their back like they have the old movies about Mitzrayim. I don't know if it's that big, but maybe it is. I'm not sure. Baos mikol makom. You can take them from anywhere because those size things. You're not doing it because you're trying to clear out your field. You're using it for another building project. Kablan, a contractor, meaning the person everyone knows is a builder, a professional, maybe mikol makom. You can bring it from anywhere. But Elohim avnei kasef. So this is the definition of avnei kasef. You're not able to carry it with only one hand. Rabbi Meir. These are words of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yossi Omer avnei kasef kishman. Rabbi Yossi says no. It's literally stones of the shoulder. You put 2 or 3 on your shoulder. So from this definition, it seems like you put a few of them on your shoulder like this and carry them when you're standing straight. That's what it sounds like to me. But I don't know how many back specialists and chiropractors they had back then. Yod habona gutter beno beno shusarabim. You're fencing, making a fence between your property and a public street. You're allowed to go deep up until the rock that's underneath. And we're not worried that it looks like you're preparing your field. But what do you do with the extra dirt that you're digging up meaning in order, I guess, to make a better fence, you can't just put it on grade. You have to put it a little bit below the ground so it'll be stronger. What do you do with all that extra dirt? Because I guess some of the dirt is good soil to use. So tzover b'shus harabim musakno. You have to put it in rishus harabim, but then fix it. So like flatten it out. Or the Tiferes actually says after you have to put into rishus harabim first, and then after that you're already able to put it back into your own field. Rabbi Yeshua. These are Rabbi Kiva Omer Kedech she'ein mekaklin b'shus harabim kach lo yisaknei. Just like you're not allowed to I don't know, destroy, but to make the public thoroughfare worse, you're not allowed to make it better either. So ma yasab offer, what do you do according to Rabbi Kiva? Tzover b'sof zadeuk derech hamzavlim. You have to pile it into your field, just similar to the way that that fertilizer is. Similarly, someone who digs some type of pit or well or cave. So if you would spread it out equally, it either looks like you're fertilizing your field, or so you're not allowed to do that. So according to Rabbi Kiva, you have to pile it in your field so that it doesn't look like you're preparing your field or making your field better for planting. We'll leave it here at the end of the third parak. God willing, next week we will commence the fourth parak. Yeah, we finished chapter 3. So as long as it's in the field for the wild animals, you can use it to feed your animals. But then there might be a separate question, because if it's stuff that normally would be human food, I don't think that you're allowed to use it for your animal on Shemitah. Meaning, you have to use it for the highest purpose. So animal food during Shemitah, you could feed it to the animals as long as the other things. But just because you have extra food, now I mean, I think house pets, most people sometimes feed their house pets with some of their own food. So if it's done in a temporary thing like that, it might be mutter, it might not be. We'll have to look into that when we get to the halachos. But it's an important question. So it's a big problem. So like where Marty was asking before about the different things to buy. So some of the religious kibbutzes do what's called the heter mechira. So it goes back 150 years almost. Well, maybe not quite that long. But the thing is, how could they eat if they don't? So they sell the field to a non-Jew, similar to the way we sell chametz. But that doesn't necessarily work because there's a whole Gemara in Gittin that a goy won't be able to uproot sanctity of Eretz Yisrael from buying it from a Jew. So that may not be enough. But then there's all the achronim from that time wrote about it. Half of them said it was okay, so half of them said it's not okay. So then this other. So when you do that, you hold that the food doesn't have sanctity at all. And then this outer Basin way is there's certain things you can do, certain things you can't do, and then when you harvest it, you give it to the basin. They're in charge of distribution, and they set the prices and stuff like that. So Migdalos, Kenny Golbet Kibbutz, hopefully they still do it. He said that they two cycles ago already, and 3 cycles I think that they were oats are based in the trees that they had. I don't remember what it was, cherries or something. I don't remember. So it depends on the kibbutz, and those are the 2 main things. And then I don't remember the details if you need a non-Jew to do some of the work. Meaning even the work that. Right. So that's another thing. But according to Minhag B'nai Brak, you treat that as if it's kedusha, and I think according to Minhag Yerushalayim, it was that it didn't have kedusha. But a lot of people in Yerushalayim are starting to be strict like B'nai Brak, as I recall. But then there are other people, especially when it started 3 Shemitas ago, when the second Intifada started, say they're trying to hurt us. We're not going to hurt them. So a Rabbi at Kirby Avenue who lived Kiryat Shmona when he made Aliyah probably 40 years ago. So he said he had gone, he went 4 months without seeing a tomato or something. But then 21 years ago, he went longer than that because his wife refused to buy stuff that the Arabs grew and the Arabs are going to make money off. So then it was worse than living all the way up by the border there by Kiryat Shmona. There are some big Jewish stuff. Yeah, that's a big problem. Yeah, that's a massive problem. But there are some places, I guess a little further than that, but there are, Arab Israeli towns, that have big populations, so yeah, the big problem, the CRC thing mentioned it, I think in 2 issues ago, that the biggest thing is that people, it's Jewish owned and Jewish thing, then they try to have an Arab sell it for them. Yeah. So that's not mutter. Right. That's the non-religious. Right.